Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy that you're tuning in. This is Artslandia Happy Hour with the Maestro, and my name is Carlos Kalmar, and I'm the music director of your Oregon Symphony. So last week I talked to all of you about the take of composers in terms of the emotion of love. And as it seems now customary, I got a bunch of interesting questions back. So I wanted to take the opportunity first to answer the questions. So Reza asked me why I choose practically nearly all the things I choose for talking and making music to all of you about love, why I choose romantic era pieces and even later, but nothing Baroque. And the explanation is very simple. Uh, I realized that when I talk about love, I'm running in a way out of time. The theme of the emotion of love and what composers were able to do with it is actually very, very long and very, very rich. So I had to decide one way, and that's where I went. And number two is also you have to consider that all the recordings that we utilize in this show in Artslandia are actually our own recordings from the past years at the Oregon Symphony, meaning we must have played it. And in Baroque music, most of the things that are about love are from operas, and we have not recorded that much about that, so that is an explanation. Steve wants to know what recordings we actually use in our shows, and I think I just answered it. It's our very own recordings from concerts we did in the past. Jackie asked me what I miss the most in terms of living in Uruguay, which was the first 15 years of my life, or in Austria, which is the next 38. And well, there are a bunch of things. In terms of Uruguay, I must say that the thing you miss the most, if you know the country, is first of all, the people. The people of Uruguay are amongst the absolute best we have in the world. They are warm, they are open, they are very welcoming, and they are extremely sincere. And in my particular case, if I think about the first 15 years of my life, what I also miss, or it creates some emotion in me to think about it, is of course the beach, because we lived barely 4 blocks from the beach, and I spent my entire summers, which were very long. Every day I went to the beach. That was a lot of fun. Um, and then Janice is asking me about how the symphony is going to adapt to what I would call, these are my words, reality in the fall, and in terms of social gathering and concerts. And Janice, and I tell all of you who are watching this, um, I would love to know, because nobody knows a real answer to that. All that probably every orchestra is doing right now is assembling data, waiting for the governors of the state in which they are in to say this is possible, this is not this possible, these are the rules we have to observe. And by observing those rules, you create whatever you actually can. But the reality is this, that things change. And right now we are just past mid-May, so we are not even at the end of the season 1920, and we're talking about 2021. I don't know. I think by the end of June or July, we will have a way clearer picture of how the country, how in specifically Oregon is going to open, and we'll do a chord. It will be, I don't know, but one thing I can promise, we are on making excellent program with our wonderful musicians. Of you and way to come and see us, if it will be so large working for all of you. And now let me talk to all of you about this afternoon's emotion, which will be anger. As you know, this is a talk that I do regularly to present to all of you a human emotion, and to look at how composers deal with that specific emotion in their compositions. Now, I remember that when I was student in the Vienna University of Music, I had a teacher who taught a topic regarding musical technique. I remember some things that he said until this day. So he used to pace around in front of his students and talk a bit about art in general. And then he would turn to us and say, music is the most cryptic of all the arts. As with many other ideas he spoke of, it took me quite a while until I understood the meaning of what he was saying. Now, when it comes to talk about emotions and their impact on classical composers, well, there might be emotions that are easier to refer to. Possible, as I said already, the one I talked about last week is the easiest, the emotion of love. Because there are thousands of love songs, opera arias, symphonic pieces, etc. But anger, for me, was a bit harder to select, at least when it comes to the raw emotion of anger. There are very few anger pieces, but other than that, composers might write about something that can make you angry, but those pieces are essentially non-specific. So, shall we start maybe there? Many times it has happened to me that I woke up in the morning to a beautiful day, blue skies, and I suggested that my family and I go hiking. Oregon, as you know, is one of the best places on the planet to do that. And while we were all preparing for the little trip, clouds came up, and when we got into the car, the first drop of rain were falling. Result? Anger. Such a wonderful plan, and now we could not enjoy nature as planned. At the same time, when Beethoven was writing his highly energetic Symphony Number 5, he was already sketching and working on the way more lyrical Symphony Number 6, the Pastoral. And this is a symphony with a program that describes many aspects of countryside life in very different melodic ways. But then, and that's why I told you my personal story about wanting to go hiking, but then when people in Beethoven's piece are at a party on the countryside enjoying dance, all of a sudden anger, angry nature breaks loose in form of a violent storm. And like real anger ideally should do, it dissipates into something else as if nothing has happened. Let's just listen to that. This was, so to speak, the mellow beginning of the anger themed happy hour on Artslandia, as if anger could have anything mellow. I believe that anger can also be non-specific, or better said, it has its original in something you cannot really grasp. And one has to work on it so it doesn't overtake all other emotions. It is this time of anger where you are upset about something that you don't really know what it is. And once somebody points it out to you, you think about it and you stop being angry. And that is the reason why I selected two different pieces of music which deal with this sentiment, at least from an interpretational point of view. In other words, there is nothing specifically angry in the story about the music, but the music itself conveys something like anger. You understand? Music sometimes can describe something, and we all can understand what it is. Like in, for example, program music, where composers allude to something clearly defined. But no such thing here. For example, Mahler, the second movement of his Symphony Number 5. What eruption of anger and brutality at the beginning of this movement. It has a relationship to the first movement because the first movement of the symphony is the most famous funeral march Mahler wrote. It is vast, it is complex, it has outbursts of despair, and it has tragic lyricism at the same time. And this first movement ends with a single loud double bass pizzicato, as if a casket is slammed shut. What now? How can you follow such a musical statement? Perhaps what Mahler wanted to do in his second movement was to accompany this substantial funeral march. The second movement bursts into the scene with anger, speed, like throwing things around before it calms down, as if looking around at the mess life has created. So let's listen together. Here is the beginning of the second movement of Mahler's Fifth. A different angle at the outbursts of anger is heard in Prokofiev, his Symphony Number 3. You know how it feels when you have enjoyed a glass of wine in the intermission of a concert. You sit down, relaxed, and await something that you might never have heard before. And then Prokofiev grabs you by the throat with such fierce brutality you can only sit up and live through this angry music. That is how this symphony starts, and overall, even though the symphony is around 34 minutes long, it doesn't change that much. But one thing I can tell you, the symphony itself ends even worse, if you will. Unrelenting, massive, unforgiving, and crushing, like uncontrolled anger. And that is where you understand that Prokofiev's Symphony Number 3 is strongly related to his own opera, The Fiery Angel. Imagine music depicting the ravings of demonic possession, eroticized spiritualism, medieval witchcraft and sorcery, and a convent of nuns whipped into mass hysteria. This is a brutal expression of something that is also very dangerously angry. This is how the symphony ends. You are at Artslandia, happy hour, and my name is Carlos Kalmar, and I'm talking to all of you about the human emotion, anger. Let us now turn our attention to the anger of something that is beyond mankind, spirituality, aka religion. I don't think it's even important whether you are a religious person or not to understand the threatening anger of the following piece by Giuseppe Verdi. This is, again, a piece of music that had a very deep impact on me when I was in my late teens, since I was allowed to attend the rehearsals of Verdi's Requiem, led by the great Italian conductor Carlo Maria Giulini in Vienna. I remember the forces he was capable of unleashing when it came to what we call the sequenza in the Requiem. We all know that the classical liturgical text that composers use when they write a requiem includes a sequenza, called dies irae, days of wrath. I don't know which part of a classical requiem is the one that is most interesting to compare composers and their take on it, but the dies irae is definitely one to watch. And the later into Romanticism, even 20th century, the history of classical music went, the more forces were available to describe this day of wrath, this episode in the Requiem. The poem describes the last judgment, trumpet summoning souls before the throne of God, where the saved will be delivered and the unsaved cast into eternal flames. To this theme, there set a Gregorian chant many centuries ago. And this old melody has been one of the most used melodies in composition overall. I'm talking about music beyond the setting of a requiem, chamber music, symphonic poems, you name it. It's all the Dies Irae theme that is Gregorian chant. Now, Verdi, in his Requiem, had two amazing tools at his disposal to make this music beautiful, angry, and threatening at the same time. Number one, a large chorus and an orchestra, and number two, a musical imagination trained in opera drama. That is why the Dies Irae in Verdi's Requiem sounds a little bit like thunder and lightning from an opera. Verdi's Requiem overall is not really what you call a devout Catholic piece, and it was not written to be performed in a church. It is a piece for the concert hall. And it is also a piece that is practically devoid of this idea of resignation, and mostly devoid also of the idea of expectancy of a joyful afterlife. It is, as you will hear, more a piece that wanders between shell-shocked despair to childlike faith. Here is the beginning of this very famous Dies Irae. Powerful stuff here at Artslandia, right? So, since we just listened to the wrath of God, let us quickly go to the utter force, anger, if you will, of a planet. The Planets by Gustav Holst has also a very personal memory to me because it was the very first piece I ever conducted as a guest conductor in the United States. I remember this for many reasons. Firstly, it was the first time I conducted this piece ever. And furthermore, I had no real idea about how American orchestras work or even what their strengths are. I was a greenhorn, if you will. So I guest conducted the Cincinnati Symphony at the end of the 80s. And it was an absolute shocker for me. The abilities of that orchestra were stunning. That was the first time I fell in love with the professionalism of American orchestras. But, well, let us return to the piece itself. In this case, Mars. The first movement of Holst's Planet is not really an anger piece at first. It is it is more or less a brutal tour de force for orchestra. It is not, and I admit to it, it's not primarily related to this afternoon's anger theme, since it could easily fit in a violence themed show. But I believe that Holst, having kept the planet Mars as the bringer of war in mind, went beyond a character portrayal of the horrors and fears that war brings to us. This movement is fierce and remorseless. And according to the conductor of the world premiere, Sir Adrian Boult, Holst wanted to express what he felt about the stupidity of war. In that sense, I think, this movement carries quite an amount of dangerous anger. This is Artslandia Happy Hour, and I'm talking to you about anger. Since I'm talking about this human emotion, it is now time to actually turn our attention towards a piece of music that depicts anger in the most literal sense. This is not an interpretation of mine. The composer, John Corigliano, wanted to express anger with parts of his first symphony. You know, I remember that at the start of the 80s, humankind was shattered by a new and at that time uncontrollable disease called AIDS. I remember reading articles about it, thinking that life as we knew it before AIDS would never come back, and that precautions would have to be taken by all of us individuals in order to not to be exposed to this deadly disease. There was a lot of fear going around, and there was also looming and misguided anger coming from different parts of society. At first, this was thought to be just a disease affecting homosexual males for the most part. Absolutely horrific things were done verbally and physically to the gay communities in many countries. And let us remember that back then, those communities were actually not allowed to live out there in the open. So, aside from hiding from the wrath of society, now society thought that they were guilty of bringing a terrible disease to mankind. To say that all this negative branding was misguided and unfair is still one of the understatement of the second half of the 20th century. We learned over time that AIDS is not only ravishing young people from the gay community. We learned over time that incredible injustice had been thrown at the LGBTQ community. We learned over time, with the advancement of medicine and science, that it was possible to live with the HIV virus for decades. We, as a society, hopefully felt ashamed. Understanding and tolerance would have made the suffering more bearable without changing its deadly outcome at first. All of that is the background for Corigliano Symphony No. 1. He thinks about his friends who died, shunned by society. He thinks about loved ones who lost their lives way too early. He is enraged and remembers all of them with deep affection. That is why this Symphony No. 1 has the title of Ragent Remembrance, and the rage explodes immediately. This is true anger as composed by the great American John Corigliano. Of course, we all have been angry about the behavior of a person. People can be aggravating, right? But in the case I want to present to you, this is not about little things that make you mad, like what happens in your daily life, like when you miss a flight because you could not get out of bed at 4 a.m. in the morning, or when you are angry because your partner left a mess in the kitchen. Again, shout out to my wife for always cleaning my messes. The anger I am talking about is considerably more complex. I would even say it's everlasting anger. It is fueled by some political realities. And here I can speak of my own upbringing. I'm the son of Austrian Jewish immigrants who had to flee Vienna in 1938, literally running for their lives and without any knowledge of where to go. I'm aware that this is the story of hundreds of thousands of individuals who had to turn their back to their country of birth because Adolf Hitler and all his followers. In the former Soviet Union, from 1946 until early 1950s, there was what was called the Zhdanov Doctrine. It defined the production of culture in the Soviet Union. The core of this doctrine was that any foreign influence, mainly imperialism, was not welcome at all. Soviet culture needed to be freed from it. It had to be pure and always serve alongside party lines. In the course of this doctrine, many leading Soviet artists were silenced. They were deprived of their livelihood and they had to survive these years, either obliging by the rules of Andrei Zhdanov or simply trying to work in hiding. The most important composers of that time in the Soviet Union were subject to such that their lives were threatened. Prokofiev, Miaskovsky, and Shostakovich are among those who suffered immensely. And all of this happened under the guidance and, of course, approval of one of the biggest mass murderers of the 20th century, Joseph Stalin. If Shostakovich would have played by the rules of Andrei Zhdanov, his Symphony No. 9 would have sounded very different. The Communist Party and the political leaders at that time were expecting, when Shostakovich was about to write this No. 9, a large symphony full of glorification of the victorious Red Army and for Stalin himself. But Shostakovich wrote the shortest of his symphonies, full of sardonic wit. It was taken as an insult, and Shostakovich was silenced and disgraced. Of course, there was mounting anger about a situation like the one Shostakovich had to endure at that time. And that anger came out in the year 1953, the year Stalin died. Whether the entire Symphony No. 10 by Shostakovich is linked to Stalin or not, that is up to interpretation. But Shostakovich himself hinted as much as to say that the second movement of that symphony was, amongst other things, a portrait of Stalin himself. It is a piece full of unimaginable anger, like the feelings you have about a mass murderer who leads a country for decades. Here is this famous second movement. music on this late afternoon at Artslandia. I'm Carlos Kalmar. And now, at the end, it's time to confront you with one of the pieces that put the Oregon Symphony on the national and international map in 2011. For the first time in our own orchestral history, and we are the oldest orchestra west of the Mississippi, we went to New York to Carnegie Hall. The most well-known critics noticed the superb way in which the Oregon Symphony executed a very challenging program. And at the center of that program was Vaughan Williams' Symphony No. 4. Now, this is an unusual piece of music considering the output of this English composer. Vaughan Williams is a highly melodic, very lyrical, often pastoral composer, an absolute delight for audiences. His most famous pieces in that regard are the Fantasy on a theme by Thomas Tallis and his wonderful Lyric Ascending. But anger? Raw, angry emotion, Englishman, that is, was and still is surprises, bleakly dissonant, relentingly driven, very angry. I've debated over time anger topic. At this time that it was premiered, nobody made a connection. Music and fascism came later. And Vaughan Williams vehemently, throughout his life, denied that this piece had an inner program. All he very famously said was, "I don't know whether I like it, but it is what I meant." Go figure. At the end of the day, at least to me, it is not even that crucial to attribute this powerful piece to a specific theme. I just imagine what would have happened if this symphony would have been written by an American in 2020. It would have been equally puzzling. And rumors would have spread immediately about what might be a hidden meaning of the music, because right now, no matter or which part of the world we look at, there might exist enough reason to be angry. There is a virus going around that has crippled all economies and forced all of us to stay at home for months. There are discerning opinions on how to deal with this crisis. And one form to deal with the mounting anger caused by this crisis is to put blame on something. The ability to have a dialogue with each other about anything even remotely political seems impossible. Racism, intolerance, dictatorship are on the rise in many countries in the world. There is violence and war in too many places. There is disregard for people who are in dire need of support. I can only hope that all of this does not ever lead to an anger that might be hard to control. Let's try to do something about it before it is too late. How amazing it is when we all can turn to the best music there is, channel our emotions through a composer's work, and live a positive life. Because even the most negative emotions, and anger is one of them, have been expressed and dealt with through art. That being said, here is the ending of Vaughan Williams' Symphony No. 4 in all its angry brutality. Make sure to tune in every weekday at 5 p.m. to Artslandia Happy Hour. Tomorrow night is an evening with a wonderful colleague and friend of mine, Kevin Irving, the artistic director of Oregon Ballet Theatre. Thank you for joining me tonight for Mondays with the Maestro. I'm Carlos Kalmar, and I look forward to next week where we will explore something that I'm still working on. Just tune in and you will be surprised. And please don't forget, aside from this wonderful Artslandia that we have in our community in Portland, that the Oregon Symphony is always there for you. Even if you don't see us right now in the concert halls because of social distancing and all the other problems we have with the coronavirus, remember, we are here for you through Artslandia, through our own webpage, and doing a lot of things in the community to make Portland a better place. Until next week.